stars fell on Alabama last night.
Hello to my LING 001 friends and family. Calvin here. I'll be making a couple references to scholarly work in this presentation. For more information on these sources, check out my final project transcription and works cited document. With that, welcome to my little podcast, The Words of God, Churches as Centers of Linguistic Community. The visible language of life in my hometown of Madison, Alabama, is almost exclusively English. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, only about 7% of the city's residents speak a language other than English at home. Compare that to nearly 22% of households nationally. With such a small, non-English speaking population, I didn't expect the linguistic landscape of my hometown to be all that interesting. Driving around, the most diversity you see is in churches. A Korean church, a Chinese church, an Iglesia de Cristo, and when you live in the Bible Belt, they aren't really something you take notice of. But if churches are just about the only place you find visible linguistic diversity in Madison, maybe they deserve a closer look. And that led me to two big questions. First, why do we see so many other languages represented in church signage as opposed to elsewhere? And second, why are certain languages, Chinese, Spanish, Korean, visible and others aren't? For the question of why churches, I talked with the pastor at La Iglesia de Cristo in Madison. He told me that people come to his church for different reasons at first. They need food, or ESL classes, or they were invited to join in on Spanish language activities done as a church. So these churches aren't just places of worship. They provide important services and support to people navigating life in a new country. Helen Ebau writes that religious institutions give immigrants a space to congregate, build social networks, learn civic skills, and enjoy the company of people like themselves. One occasional member of the Chinese Church of Madison, we'll call her Emily, said it this way.
Everyone's coming together and able to feel comfortable with their culture, their language, and just be around people, meet people of the same culture and language as them.
Religious institutions provide a sense of community and comfort and religious solace, all within a native language that immigrants seldom get to speak in public community settings. Emily also told me that
Chinese immigrant parents will want to try and bring as much of the Chinese culture to their kids as possible, whether that be just encouraging them to learn at home and speak Chinese to them, or with lessons at church.
So this desire to preserve language in some immigrant families encourages them to find a linguistic community, one where the children of first-generation immigrants might learn more about the language and culture of a home country. The community aspects of the church certainly encourage this, and so too do the religious. In fact, Thomas Sowell's work with the beliefs and languages of migrants proposes that religion can provide a cognitive and emotional framework for transmitting concrete home country ties like language. With all this in mind, I have more of an appreciation for the churches I usually pass without a second thought. They so prominently display their languages because they have to be visible to the people who need the support, services, and community of church in their mother tongue. Now to my second question. Why are certain languages represented in these churches and others aren't? Madison County's most spoken languages other than English are Spanish, German, Chinese, Korean, and French. Spanish, Korean, and Chinese churches and signage exist, but as far as I can tell, only one church, the Lamb of God Lutheran, has German language services, and only during the holidays, and all signage is in English. There are no French-speaking services in the entire town. An explanation for this disparity started to form from the observations of my fellow Madisonians. The pastor at the Iglesia de Cristo said that most of his congregants were first-generation immigrants who grew up speaking Spanish in Mexico, Peru, or Colombia. Emily told me that the adults at the Chinese Christian church were all first-generation migrants as well, and
among the adults, Chinese is spoken, and then among the kids, people who grew up in America, and English is their better language, I would say. We all speak English to each other, but when I'm sitting with my parents or something, I'll speak Chinese with them.
A member of the youth leadership at the Chinese church told me that English is offered more and more alongside Mandarin Chinese.
Whenever we're together or like we have a joint service for things like communion and such, then it's usually either a side-by-side translation, or you have like it's just all Chinese, and then the people who need English, they have like a headphones they can wear where someone else in another room is like translating.
Majority first-generation immigrant congregations, generational code switching between languages, and the growing presence of English in these congregations lead to what I like to call the life cycle of a minority language church. Simply put, these churches only exist when and where there's a need for them. Immigrants arriving in Madison often grew up speaking a different language, so a church community in their native tongue is a blessing. As seen in Emily's observations about her own church, and a case study on Korean American churches by Jin-Sok Lee, who is a Georgetown alum, by the way, second-generation church members often feel more comfortable speaking English, and as the congregation changes over time, so too do its needs. A monolingual minority language church may become monolingual English if new waves of immigrants don't continue to create a need for services in a different language. What once branded itself as the Korean or Chinese church might become just a church. The many French and German speakers in Madison no longer require the services of a specialized church community, because these immigrant populations arrived much longer ago and have had more time to adjust and assimilate, reaching the end of their minority language church life cycles. You can see some evidence for this in the fact that today, German and French speakers in Alabama have the highest rates of English proficiency among the state's non-English language groups. In Madison, the remnants are seen, at most, in those occasional German services at the Lamb of God Lutheran Church. This project has helped me see the history and complexities that lay behind something I always took for granted. For that, I'm grateful, and for you all listening to this, I'm grateful too. Thank you so, so much.